Hey y'all, howdy. Welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell. New recording location today. I'm in my husband's office. This is my April wrap up, and I read 7 books. 2 of those were fantasy, 2 were thrillers, 2 were nonfiction, and 1 was poetry. I also DNF'd 1 collection of short stories. I had a really low reading month compared to my typical. April was super busy for me life-wise, not so much reading-wise, and so I just didn't have a lot of time. I read less than 2,000 pages, and that hasn't happened since May of 2022. So it's been almost a year since I've had such a low reading month. But I still enjoyed the things that I read, so let's get into it. We'll start with a goals check-in. If you've been keeping up with my wrap-ups this year, you know I had several yearly goals that I am trying to keep up with. So one of my goals for 2023 is to read every book that I bought or acquired in 2022. For this month, I read Bright Dead Things by Ada Limon. Ada Limon is our National Poet Laureate, and she also lives in my city of Lexington, Kentucky. So this past November, I went and saw a reading that she did, and there were several of her books for sale, so I bought Bright Dead Things there. The next goal that I have for 2023 is to read another book by every new to me author from 2022 whose book I rated 4 stars or higher. Bright Dead Things also falls into that category because I read The Hurting Kind by Ada Limon last year. I also read The Kingkiller Chronicles, which is The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear, in 2022, and so this year I'm reading The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. Last year, say hi, Pogi. Last year, I read the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, and so this month I read Best Served Cold. And last year, I read The 22 Murders of Madison May by Max Berry, so this month I read Lexicon. And then finally, I also attempted to read Telling the Map by Christopher Rowe, but unfortunately, this is the one that I DNF'd. Last year, I read These Prisoning Hills, which is a novella by Christopher Rowe. Really enjoyed the novella, thought that the concept was super fascinating and definitely left me wanting more. But unfortunately, with Telling the Map, it is a collection of short stories. They were speculative. I read the first 2 stories and I got about 19% of the way into the book. And then I got like 3-star vibes from both of them, and I had so little time to read that month that I just wasn't really feeling it. And so it was kind of a soft DNF where I was just like, oh, I just have so many other things I'd rather be reading. And in the spirit of not putting myself in a reading slump, I just set it down and didn't pick it back up. I could see myself trying this again in the future, but for now it's a DNF. So now I'll go through the books in the order that I read them and give you all my thoughts. The very first book that I read in the month of April was In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I gave this 3.5 stars. I flew through it. It was absolutely gripping. And this is about a group of friends from college that are returning to their campus for their 10-year college reunion. There were 7 of them when they were in college, but one of them was murdered back when they were still undergrads. And the murder case was never really solved. So when they come back for the reunion, all this stuff kind of gets dredged back up, and they get wrapped up in the mystery of who actually killed their friend. The thing I didn't like about this book was the characters were super unlikable. They were just all completely despicable people. They all seemed like they had motive and the will to murder their friend, and I just didn't think any of them were redeemable, and I didn't want them to win or be absolved of the guilt. I felt like they all kind of deserved to go to prison, so that made it hard for me to care about the outcome of the book. But like I said, it was super duper gripping. I read this in like a day and a half maybe. It was very melodramatic at points. There was even like a character at one point was like, "It was you!" and like really there was like fainting happening. There was just lots of juice. There was lots of juice. Yeah, so it was engaging, but it was not really my style. So 3.5 stars. Second, I read Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. and I loved this book. Best Served Cold, as you can imagine from the title, is a revenge tale. This is in the First Law world, but it is a standalone book that takes place after the first trilogy. There are characters that you would recognize from the first trilogy, but there are none of the main characters from the first trilogy are in this book. This book centers on a character named Monza Mercado and her brother. They are mercenaries. They go to collect payment for a job well done, and something terrible happens. And there were 7 people in the room when that something happened. And so the entire plot of the book is taking revenge on those 7 people who wronged Monza and her brother. This was just, I think, the thing that worked for me better than, like, say, The Blade itself, which is the first book in the trilogy, was that the plot was just so tight. Like, it was very clear from the get-go, this is a revenge tale. There are 7 people. We're going to murder them one by one by one. It was just really well done. And the character work that Joe Abercrombie is so well known for really, really shines through in this book. I felt like all of the characters were super strong, except with the exception of one. So the side characters really shine. Shivers is a Northman who has left the North in order to kind of leave his old life behind and become a better person. But then he's hired by Monza to be this mercenary and help her, like, murder these people. And so he has all these conflicts about what it means to be a good person and if he's a good person and if it's worth it to try to be good. There's a really interesting character named Friendly who is just very obsessed with numbers. He's like constantly counting things. There's Casca, who you would know from the previous books. Casca is this mercenary. He's an alcoholic. He's like very optimistic despite all these terrible things that happen to him. Morveer is a poisoner that Monza hires, and he is completely self-obsessed and pompous, and he's also super suspicious of everyone else because his whole job is to poison people. And then his assistant Day was my least favorite character, just because her, like, one personality trait, it seemed like, was that she liked food. And every single time she appeared on the page, it was mentioned, like, what she was nibbling on or how hungry she was. And I felt like Joe Abercrombie was beating me over the head with the fact that Day likes food. And I was like, okay, Joe, we get it. Like, let's move on. There was also an assassin named Shanked. I'm not really sure how to say his name, but he's just like, yeah, he's an assassin with a heart of gold. Like, we really got to see kind of his inner workings a little bit in this book. Yeah, it was just really like this ragtag crew out to murder, like morally great characters done so well. The plot was so tight. I just absolutely loved it. The third thing I picked up was The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. This is, like I said earlier, a short story or novella that goes along with the Kingkiller Chronicles. This is a story from the perspective of Ari, who is the girl that Kvothe meets, who lives in the Underthing below the magical academy that Kvothe attends. And despite the fact that this is a tale from Ari's perspective, I still feel like her only purpose is to serve Kvothe's story. I liked Ari. I liked exploring the Underthing with her, but I feel like I would like her a lot better if she was written by someone besides Patrick Rothfuss. She was just super, like, manic pixie dream girl in the extreme. So that was disappointing after really enjoying The Name of the Wind. I loved Patrick Rothfuss's writing in that, and I didn't really feel like any of that shined through in this one. Then I read a nonfiction called Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. Basically, this is a deep dive on story structure and how to outline a novel. Looks at a lot of really famous books and kind of breaks them down using the story structure, which was super helpful for me. It looks at, like, classics as well as, like, popular modern day books. And if you saw my video using AI to help develop my fantasy novel earlier, which I'll link above, you know that I am planning to write a fantasy novel in the near future. So I will definitely be using this as a reference for a long time to come. I really enjoyed this and would highly recommend it to anyone looking to write a novel or learn more about story structure. Then I read Lexicon by Max Berry. This is a thriller with some sci-fi elements. Basically, the premise is that words have power, that words create these associations in our brains, and that if you find the right words or the right sequence of sounds, that you can basically like short circuit people's brains and like manipulate them into doing what you want them to do. So there's this whole secret society built around learning these manipulation secrets behind language and learning how to basically manipulate people into doing what they want, all for nefarious purposes, of course. So our two main characters are this guy named Will, who like in the very first page is kidnapped when he's like deboarding a plane at the airport and wrapped up in all of this conspiracy, not really knowing anything that's going on. And then our second point of view character is this girl named Emily, who was homeless and was kind of like a street swindler who was like always doing card tricks and stuff to get people to play into her little magic schemes. And she is recruited by this secret cult, and she gets whisked away to their basically like magical language academy school to learn all of their tips and tricks of the trade in order to be one of their like rising stars within the organization. So it was super engaging, super fast paced, very popcorn style, just like gripping thriller, everything I wanted out of it. It was great. All right, the second to last book that I read this month was Letters to a Young Poet by Rainier Maria Rilke. Rilke was a famous poet in the early 1900s, and my cat's very upset about this video apparently. Anyway, very famous poet in the early 1900s, and this is a series of letters that he wrote to another young aspiring poet. And it talks about the creative process and what it means to be an artist. It's very philosophical. He espouses views on God and sex and life and kind of all the things that artists think about. And it was very like creatively inspiring. He has a very hopeful tone through all of it, and just very, very beautiful writing. As you can tell, I tabbed quite a bit of it, even though it was so short. Really, really enjoyed this. Okay, and then lastly, I read Bright Dead Things by Ada Limon. This is so beautiful. Her poems just have such depth that like capture me right away. This collection of poetry, I believe, was written basically like right after she moved to Kentucky from New York. It talks about how she didn't want to move to Kentucky and then how she grew to love this place. The middle section, a lot of her poems are about how she was a caretaker for her stepmother as she passed away and kind of all the grief that comes with that. It's just stunning. She talks about nature a lot, which I always love in poetry. Her poetry inspires me to write poetry. So I just feel like there can't be a better poem experience than that. If something inspires you so much that you want to write like that person yourself, then it's just delightful. Highly recommend any collection of poetry by Ada Limon, and I'm excited that I've only read 2 and she has so many more that I haven't gotten to yet, that there's more to look forward to. So that was it for my April wrap up. I read 2 ebooks, and then these were the physical books that I read this month. I have really high hopes for May. I really plan to read a lot more than I did in April, and I think I'll have the opportunity to do that. So I made a super ambitious TBR. I'm participating in 3 different readathons: the Asian readathon, the May the Force Read With You readathon, and the Dystopian readathon. So if you're interested in my picks for all of those, you can check out my May TBR, which I'll link here. If you've read any of these books, please be sure to let me know in the comments below what you thought of them. Thanks so much for hanging out with me a little bit today, and as always, be kind, read books, and hit the subscribe button below for more bookish content to come. I'll see you next time.